The Man in Black is behind some of the most famous songs in music, but to many listeners, he's still a man of mystery. If you want to sound like an expert, you'll want to know all of this about Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash's life was one of breathtaking highs and unfathomable lows. Despite his legendary talent and all the respect he commanded because of it, Cash was a man who frequently succumbed to his temptations and tested the faith others had in him. Johnny Cash was the fourth of 7 children, born February 26, 1932 in Kingsland, Arkansas, to Ray and Carrie Cash. In his memoir, Johnny Cash, the autobiography, Cash recalled that the house in which he was born didn't have any windows, and in winter, his mother had to hang blankets to keep them warm. The Depression hit the Cash family hard, but when Johnny was 3 years old, they moved to the Dias colony in northeast Arkansas, taking part in a federal farming program in which the family farmed 20 acres of cotton and other crops. When he was 5, Johnny started working the fields alongside his parents and siblings. He started first as a water boy, carrying drinking water out to his family. By the time he was 8, he was picking cotton with them, dragging a heavy canvas sack that started empty, but by the end of the day held 200 or more pounds of cotton. Cash wrote in his memoir, "It wasn't complicated. You just parked the wagon at one end of the rows and went to it." He said the work was exhausting and painful. He had back pain, even as a child, and the cotton bolls he picked were sharp, which cut his hands. Cash remembered, "We just worked and worked and worked." One Saturday morning when Johnny Cash was 12, he asked his older brother Jack to go fishing. Jack declined, since he had a job cutting oak trees into posts and working at a table saw. In his autobiography, Cash remembers begging his brother to skip the work, but Jack said no. Cash went by himself, but the time he spent there felt listless, and eventually he left and headed for home. On his way back, his father met him on the road in a panic. There had been an accident, and Jack was badly hurt. He had been pulled into the saw and cut from his ribs through his stomach to his groin. Jack clung on to life for close to a week before finally succumbing. Cash later remembered, "After Jack's death, I felt like I'd died too. I had no other friend." As he grew up, Cash felt his brother's influence on him. Cash wrote, "The most important question in my life has been, which is Jack's way? Which direction would he have taken?" Jack even showed up in Cash's dreams from time to time, usually when Cash was either doing something he shouldn't have been doing or about to do something he shouldn't have been doing. In the dreams, Jack would know what Cash wanted to do and would look at him with an admonishing smile. According to Cash, there's no fooling Jack. When Cash was in the Air Force, he incessantly wrote letters to a woman named Vivian Liberto, who he had met at a roller rink and would later marry after leaving the service. Their domestic situation was a relatively normal one, in the sense that he got a job and they started a family, but all that changed when Cash started playing and recording music. Cash had a hit record, Cry, 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 that compelled him to go out on tour, and that spelled trouble for their marriage. Eventually, according to biographer Steve Turner, Cash was away from home up to 80% of the year, traveling some 300,000 miles in the process. Unfortunately, during his time he also began to succumb to his addiction to amphetamines and alcohol, and also developed an eye for the attractive, sassy women he'd often meet on the road. Around this time, he also met and began flirting with June Carter, who would go on to become his second wife. Cash's time on the road made his time at home difficult to bear. His eldest daughter, Roseanne, would later remember, "It got to where it was like somebody else was coming home, not my daddy. The drugs were at work, he'd stay up all night, he and my mom would fight, it was so sad." According to another of his daughters, Cindy, Vivian would often put her children in the car and go looking for a drunken Cash around town. She finally filed for divorce in 1966, and it was granted the following year. In 1961, Cash and his wife Vivian moved with their 4 daughters to Casita Springs in Ventura County, California, where Vivian hoped he would be convinced to give up the pills and alcohol that had become an integral and dangerous part of his life. Instead, his problems got worse, particularly with amphetamines. His daughter Roseanne later said, "In my pre-teen years, my father's drug addiction was really consuming him and my parents' marriage. There was just this background tension and anxiety to all of those years. The pills would leave his voice a mere croak, and it got to the point where he was having trouble performing. Often, he never showed up to his gigs at all. Eventually, Cash stopped taking amphetamines, but his vigilance would sometimes wane. After all, he was still an addict and an alcoholic. He couldn't just take one pill. He needed a handful. He couldn't just have one drink. He needed to empty out his hotel room's minibar. Cash's struggles continued in the 80s when he was prescribed pain medication for various surgeries and illnesses and continued to take them after he no longer needed them. Luckily, Cash didn't face these demons alone. The singer's struggles required a steadying influence in his life, so when he couldn't manage himself, he leaned on his second wife, June.
She's not only a lady who I share my life with, but she may have been the person responsible for me still being alive.
Strangely enough, the man who sang so convincingly about shooting a man in Reno just to watch him die was never once in his life incarcerated in an actual prison. He was, however, arrested several times for a variety of offenses related to drugs, either for procuring them or for his many escapades under their influence. Steve Turner's Cash biography tells the story of October 1965, when Cash took a flight to El Paso, Texas, then caught a cab to take him across the Mexican border to Juarez, where he bought 668 Dexedrine and 475 Equinil tablets on the black market and hid them in his guitar. Unfortunately for him, the dealer was under surveillance for allegedly selling heroin. Cash was arrested at the airport and held overnight on drug smuggling charges. He also faced charges back in El Paso for possession of the pills. Earlier that year, in May, Cash was drunk and out well past curfew in Starkville, Mississippi, when police arrested him and put him in a holding cell overnight to sober up. According to Rolling Stone, Cash kicked his foot against the cell door so hard that he broke one of his toes. And in November 1967, while under the influence of pills, Cash went on a joyride through Georgia before banging on the door of a rural home until the police were summoned. His arrest that time netted him a night in jail. Cash often told a story about a time in which he was so deep in the throes of drug-related despair that he found himself completely robbed of the will to live. According to Cash, he trekked up to the Nickajack Cave in Tennessee in the fall of 1967. In his autobiography, he wrote, "Nickajack contained the remains of many cave explorers, amateur adventurers who'd lost their lives in the caves over the years, usually by losing their way, and it was my hope and intention to join their company." Cash said he crawled through the cave for several hours until his flashlight batteries gave out, at which point he laid down in the pitch dark, ready to die. He said he'd never felt so far from God, but as he laid there, an epiphany came over him, that perhaps it wasn't his time to die. He got up and found his way out of the cave in the dark, guided by a small draft of air, and subsequently promised to quit drugs that very day. Cash recounted this story many times. It's published in his memoir and in a number of magazines and books that cover his life. But the story has many detractors. For example, Marshall Grant, Cash's friend and former bass player, says it never happened. And Robert Hilburn, Cash's biographer, notes that the Nickajack Cave was underwater in the fall of 1967, since the Army Corps of Engineers had dammed it up. He also wrote, Cash did not quit drugs that day. Cash's legacy as a singer, songwriter, song interpreter, and shaper and reshaper of country music is unquestioned. There are few figures in country whose shadow looms as large as Cash's. When he was alive, he was larger than life. But that status came at a cost. His problems loomed large too, and as he suffered, so did those around him. Still, when Johnny Cash spoke, millions listened. When he sang, millions sang along. And when he died, millions mourned him. That kid who grew up poor on the cotton farm sure made a hell of an impact.
Johnny Cash was bigger than life, but while the details of the music legend's life and career have become the stuff of myth, in reality, Cash had a dark side that was even darker than you might know, like the time he almost single-handedly caused the extinction of an entire species. On June 27, 1965, Cash went camping with his nephew Damon Fielder at California's Los Padres National Forest. According to the Los Angeles Times, both men argued for most of the trip, as Fielder was bothered by his uncle's heavy drinking and pill popping. According to Fielder, that night, Cash, apparently feeling the need to keep warm, made a fire. Unfortunately, the fire quickly spread out of control and ended up destroying more than 500 acres of land and killing 49 critically endangered California condors. Fielder believed that his uncle might have been so wasted on booze and amphetamines that he allowed the blaze to go out of control. Given the circumstances, it was no surprise that investigators held Cash liable for the fire. While giving his sworn testimony in court, he told a different story from that of his nephew. He claimed that a malfunctioning exhaust pipe on his camper was to blame for the blaze, quipping, "I didn't do it, my truck did, and it's dead, so you can't question it." He also didn't appear to show remorse after his recklessness nearly caused an entire species to go extinct, allegedly saying at one point, "I don't care about your damn yellow buzzards." Per the Vintage Times, Cash was ultimately found guilty and fined $82,000 for accidentally causing the wildfire. The California condor, meanwhile, officially went extinct in the wild in 1987, but breeding programs in captivity have allowed the species to rebound slightly to just over 500 individuals in recent years. It was far from the last time Cash's addictions would get him in trouble, not just with the law, but with his family and closest loved ones. Despite the happy ending Walk the Line gave the couple, Cash's marriage to June Carter wasn't all a fairy tale. Johnny and June's son, John Carter Cash, revealed that while his parents ostensibly had a perfect marriage, behind closed doors, the suffering continued and it worsened, if anything, throughout the years. That's because, according to the Culture Trip, Cash suffered the first of what would become several relapses in 1977. After entering rehab that year, he was drug-free once again, only to relapse in 1983, again in 1989, then a fourth time in 1992.
I could hear them talking around my bed. I'd be in a fog. I could hear them talking about he may not pull through.
In his book, Anchored in Love, The Life and Legacy of June Carter Cash, John Carter Cash went into greater detail about his parents' substance abuse issues and oftentimes turbulent 35-year marriage. However, he stressed that Johnny and June truly had long-lasting love for each other, saying, "My parents' love for each other lasted throughout their whole life. They didn't give up." Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash, two sides of a love triangle? These two music icons have more in common than you might think. This is the truth about their friendship. 706 Union Avenue in Memphis, Tennessee marks the spot of what could be called the birthplace of rock and roll, or at least the place that brought rock and roll into the mainstream. According to The National, it all began in 1954, when a 19-year-old Elvis Presley performed Arthur Crudup's That's All Right for Sam Phillips, founder of Sun Records. That same year, Johnny Cash performed gospel songs in an audition for Phillips, who told him to, quote, "go home and sin, then come back with a song I can sell." By the end of 1954, Presley and Cash were both signed to the label. Sun Records president John Singleton told The National, "I can't say for sure what pop music would sound like today without a Sun Records in the 50s, but there may not have been a Beatles or Rolling Stones. I believe it would be hard to find a successful rock artist who was not a fan of Sun." The first time Cash met Presley, Elvis was performing from the flatbed of a truck to sing for a couple hundred people at a drugstore opening. At that time, he had only released one single and was left with no choice but to play the same two songs, his only songs, on a loop. It wasn't much of a show, so Presley invited Cash and his wife Vivian to see his next concert. It didn't go much better. Cash wrote in Cash, the autobiography, the date was a blunder because the place was an adult club where teenagers weren't welcome, and so Vivian and I were two of only a dozen or so patrons, 15 at the most. All the same, I thought Elvis was great. He didn't say much. He didn't have to, of course. His charisma alone kept everyone's attention. Still, Cash came away impressed, especially with Presley's underrated rhythm guitar playing. Cash could see that Elvis was destined for greater things. Throughout his life, Johnny Cash felt a certain loyalty to the Elvis Presley he knew in the 1950s. He wrote in Cash, the autobiography, that he much preferred Presley's music when they first met over his popular later work, which Cash thought was overproduced. "My Elvis was the Elvis of the 50s. He was a kid when I worked with him. He was 19 years old and he loved cheeseburgers, girls, and his mother. Not necessarily in that order. It was more like his mother than girls than cheeseburgers. Personally, I liked cheeseburgers and I had nothing against his mother, but the girls were the thing. He had so many girls after him that whenever he was working with us, there were always plenty left over. We had a lot of fun." Presley, his rock and roll songs, and his hip shaking famously drew hordes of enthusiastic girls, but Cash emphasized in his biography that Presley's stardom was built on more than sex appeal. "Elvis was so good. Every show I did with him, I never missed the chance to stand in the wings and watch. We all did. He was that charismatic." In the mid-1950s, June Carter of the country trio the Carter Sisters went on tour with Elvis. Presley took to playing Cash's music on the road. In her 1987 autobiography, From the Heart, Carter recalled a time when Presley was trying to tune his guitar and sing Cash's early hit, Cry, Cry, Cry. Carter recalled saying, quote, "I don't know this Johnny Cash," to which Presley replied, "Oh, you'll know Cash. The whole world will know Johnny Cash. He's a friend of mine." In June 1956, Carter and Cash finally met at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee. Carter wrote, "Johnny Cash took me by the hand and said, 'I've always wanted to meet you.' The strangest feeling came over me. I was afraid to look him in the eyes. It was one of the things I did best. I never stammered and still found myself not able to say much of anything. I think I finally blurted out, 'I feel like I know you already. Elvis plays you on the jukebox all the time and he can't tune his guitar without humming Cry, Cry, Cry. Now he's got me doing it.'" In 2008, John Carter Cash, the son of Johnny Cash and June Carter, released the biography Anchored in Love, an intimate portrait of June Carter Cash. In the book, John addressed speculation that June may have had an affair with Elvis Presley. He wrote, "Throughout my life, I would see my mom get a mischievous twinkle in her eye whenever she mentioned Elvis Presley. Her eyes would flash merrily and she would say, 'You know, son, your father was always jealous of Elvis.' She even told me once that she sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had fallen in love with Elvis." John Carter Cash speculated that there may have been more to his mother's speculation than idle fancy. He wrote, "Though Mom always maintained that she never had an affair with Elvis, Carl Smith, her first husband, believed differently and perhaps for good reason. After Carl moved out of their Madison home, Mom would sometimes let Elvis stay at the house to rest after a tour." On December 4, 1956, singer-songwriter Carl Perkins headed to Memphis' Sun studio for a recording session. A pre-famed Jerry Lee Lewis was there on keys, and by pure coincidence, Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash both stopped by the studio. The foursome then played a 23-song blend of gospel, bluegrass, and contemporary hits, including Presley's own Love Me Tender and Don't Be Cruel. Recognizing the unusual and now historic nature of this meeting of musical minds, Sun Records founder Sam Phillips alerted the Memphis Press Scimitar. The paper ran the story the following day, complete with a photo of the four musicians captioned "The $1 Million Quartet." Cash describes the session in Cash the Autobiography, writing, "I was the first to arrive and the last to leave, contrary to what has been written. I was just there to watch Carl record, which he did until mid-afternoon, when Elvis came in with his girlfriend. At that point, the session stopped and we all started laughing and cutting up together. Then Elvis sat down at the piano, and we started singing gospel songs we all knew." Though some have said that Cash can't be heard in the recordings, he wrote that this isn't true. "Contrary to what some people have written, my voice is on the tape. It's not obvious because I was farthest away from the mic and I was singing a lot higher than I usually did in order to stay in key with Elvis, but I guarantee you, I'm there." In 1959, Johnny Cash opened for Elvis Presley on a live tour. He began with a slapstick, hip-swiveling Elvis impression and a rendition of the King's 1958 hit Heartbreak Hotel. Then when Presley would enter the stage, he would take his turn impersonating the Man in Black. Presley's Cash impression reportedly traveled offstage and on the road. According to Chuck Crisafulli and George Klein's 2010 book, Elvis, My Best Man, Radio Days, Rock and Roll Nights, and My Lifelong Friendship with Elvis Presley. During Presley's 1957 tour, he was riding a train when a teenage girl approached him, greeted him with an excited Johnny Cash, and asked him to sing one of his, Cash's, songs. Klein wrote, "Elvis would never sing one of his own songs in that type of situation, but for this little Johnny Cash fan, he dropped his voice to its lowest notes and started singing a few lines of Hey Porter, a song Cash had cut at Sun that seemed especially appropriate for a midnight train ride. The girl was thrilled and even ended up with an autograph from Elvis which read, 'Best wishes, Johnny Cash.'" The level of stardom that Elvis Presley experienced inevitably came with its share of scrutiny, and although Presley was eager to shake his hips on the world stage, he had a hard time with criticism of any kind, and particularly the rumors about him using drugs, as Johnny Cash noted in Cash the Autobiography. Presley was very sensitive, easily hurt by the stories people told about him being on dope and so on. I myself couldn't understand why people wanted to say that back in the 50s, because in those days he was the last person on earth who needed dope. He had such a high energy level that it seemed he'd never stop, though maybe that's why they said he was on dope. Cash went on to say that as far as he knew, there was no basis to the rumors. "I never saw any evidence of it. I never saw him use any kind of drug or even alcohol. He was always clear-headed around me and very pleasant." Cash himself didn't see Presley as a bad boy or a contentious figure at all. He wrote, "Elvis was such a nice guy and so talented and charismatic. He had it all. That some people just couldn't handle it and reacted with jealousy. It's only human, I suppose, but it's sad." Beyond the 1950s, Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash went their separate ways. In 2020, Cash's son John Carter Cash told Express, Elvis went on to make his films and some more music later on, and they never worked again together after the 1950s. Cash explained why in Cash the Autobiography. He wrote, "He and I liked each other, but we weren't that tight. I was older than he was for one thing, and married for another, and we weren't close at all in his later years. I took the hint when he closed his world around him. I didn't try to invade his privacy. I'm so glad I didn't either, because so many of his old friends were embarrassed so badly when they were turned away at Graceland. In the 1960s and 70s, Cash's occasional interactions with Presley were positive, but professional, and conducted from a distance. Cash recalled in his book, "He and I chatted on the phone a couple of times and swapped notes now and again. If he were closing at the Las Vegas Hilton as I was getting ready to open, he'd wish me luck, that kind of thing. But that was about the extent of it." Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977 at the age of 42. That December, Johnny Cash recorded the Johnny Cash Christmas Special, which included an all-star tribute to the King. He was joined by the other two members of the Million Dollar Quartet, Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis, as well as fellow Sun Records star Roy Orbison. The group then performed the gospel standard "This Train is Bound for Glory" in Presley's honor, with Cash saying,
"He was a star, and he always was a star. Because all of us remember him and how he loved gospel songs and how we liked him."
The special also included performances of 3 songs that Presley had recorded. Cash teamed up with the quartet, the Statler Brothers, to perform Blue Christmas, a song Presley popularized in 1957. Perkins performed Blue Suede Shoes, which he wrote and initially recorded in 1955 before Elvis covered it in 1956. Lewis performed Whole Lotta Shakin' Going On, which he popularized in 1957 and Presley covered in 1971. Johnny Cash was known for transcending the boundaries of genre and getting crowds, ranging from devout Christians to prison inmates, on their feet. But by 1988, after 3 decades of touring with countless rock and roll icons, Cash had his own idea of which artist had the best stage presence: the King himself. Cash said during a 1988 interview on The Late Late Show,
The best performer, probably Elvis Presley. I don't think anybody could touch him.
Cash expounded on just why Elvis stood out from the rest, saying he had a lot of rhythm, he was a very good singer, and he was a fabulous performer in the way he moved the people.
And not only the girls loved Elvis, but every man backstage was standing in the wings watching Elvis. He had that charisma.
One thing is certain, we'll never see the likes of Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley again.
Country music legend Johnny Cash died at 71 due to complications from diabetes on September 12, 2003. There is nothing easy about Cash's life, and his last year proved to be one of his most challenging. Here's what the final 12 months of Johnny Cash's life were like. Johnny Cash spent most of the 1990s dealing with health issues. While he was originally misdiagnosed with Shy-Drager syndrome, his doctors later diagnosed him with autonomic neuropathy in 2000, a complication of diabetes. According to Johnny Cash, the biography by Michael Streisguth, his neuropathy often resulted in bouts of pneumonia that forced him to spend a lot of time in the hospital. In 2002, after he finished recording for his wife June Carter Cash's album Wildwood Flower, he fell ill again. By this time, he was finding it difficult to walk and had trouble with his eyesight, too. He was taken to the hospital for what seemed to be an allergic reaction. Legendary country star Merle Haggard, who was a close friend, told Rolling Stone, "We knew he'd been sick, and we thought he was going to die so many times over the last couple years. If you want to get really serious, he'd been near death for decades." Johnny Cash lived in constant, serious pain. Although Johnny Cash was in severe pain in the last year of his life and struggled to get things done, he remained stoic and kept his pain to himself, preferring to distract himself with work. As Haggard explained to Rolling Stone, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was somewhere around an 8 for the last 8 years of his life. Haggard added that Cash didn't take care of himself and didn't eat well for a while, which made his bones brittle. Cash ended up breaking his jaw during dental surgery and never quite recovered from it. He lived as an example of a man in pain, going from one stage of bad health to another, but he held his head up the whole way. All Cash wished to do was work on his next album, even as his health issues grew increasingly worse. Music producer Rick Rubin said that Cash somehow could still record and keep his spirits high. One of his qualities was that he would never really talk about pain or if he wasn't doing well, so we never really knew other than when it got so bad he would say, "I can't sing anymore now. I have to lay down for a little while." In his final months, Johnny Cash was committed to music and didn't wish to stop producing albums and singing live. He was very active in the industry and worked tirelessly on his last album, American 4, The Man Comes Around. In fact, Cash recorded about 60 songs in his last 4 months. The recording process was not easy, as Cash struggled with complications from neuropathy, though he never complained about how his illnesses were ravaging his body. Vanity Fair reported that he worried about how it was affecting his signature baritone voice, which now quavered. Still, Cash told NME that he was determined to keep making music no matter what. Sometimes I came to the studio and I couldn't sing. I came in with no voice when I could have stayed home and pouted in my room and cried in my beer or my milk, but I didn't let that happen. We put more blood, sweat, and tears and love into this one than anything we've ever done. It reaches out even farther and in more directions than the others did. Widely regarded as one of his most heart-wrenching covers, Cash's version of the Nine Inch Nails song Hurt was released in 2003. According to Dave Urbanski's book The Man Comes Around, The Spiritual Journey of Johnny Cash, filmmaker Mark Romanek told the author, quote, "I begged Rick Rubin to let me shoot something to that track." Romanek flew to Nashville and was inspired by the Cash Museum. It had been closed for a long time. The place was in such a state of dereliction. That's when I got the idea that maybe we could be extremely candid about the state of Johnny's health, as candid as Johnny has always been in his songs. The video was a massive hit, striking a chord with viewers. However, what many don't know is that Cash's family was initially unsure about the video, asking Romanek to edit it and make it less maudlin. One of Cash's daughters, Roseanne, said, "I didn't want to watch it because we were already in that space of years of intense anxiety about my dad's health and this fear that he was going to die at any moment." In 2002, Johnny Cash released an updated version of an earlier track, Give My Love to Rose. The song was originally produced in 1957 for Sun Records, and Cash chose to revisit it many times in his career. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Cash's daughter Roseanne said, "My father, when he would call my mother from the road, he would say, 'Give my love to Roseanne,' so I think that's probably where it came from. I never asked him outright." In 2003, the song earned Cash a Grammy win for Best Male Country Vocal Performance. It was the last he would win during his lifetime, but he went on to win 2 more posthumously, bringing his total number of Grammy wins to 13 so far. Throughout all of Cash's health issues, his beloved wife June Carter Cash provided support. So it was a tremendous shock when she unexpectedly passed away on May 15, 2003, following complications from heart valve replacement surgery. Roseanne Cash told Vanity Fair, "It was so shocking to think, all of our anxiety had been focused on Dad for 10 years, and the whole time she was slipping away." Rick Rubin told Vanity Fair, "I spoke to Johnny maybe a half hour or an hour after she passed away, and he sounded by far the worst I'd ever heard him. He sounded terrible. He said that he'd experienced so much pain in his life and that nothing came anywhere near to how he was feeling at that moment." Everyone feared for Johnny after June's passing, as they worried he wouldn't be able to go on without her. It was a fear that he himself shared. Rubin told Vanity Fair that Cash threw himself into his work. It actually got more intense after June died, because before, we always worked kind of casually, either whenever we had a song or whenever he felt like recording. Now he said to me, "I want to work every day, and I need you to have something for me to do every day. Because if I don't have something to focus on, I'm gonna die." According to Rolling Stone, Cash got back to work just 3 days after June passed away. Rick Rubin told the magazine, he said, "I don't want to do any of the things some people do when they lose their partner. I don't want to go out and spend a lot of money. I don't want to meet girls. I don't want to do anything of this world. I want to make music and do the best work I can. That's what she would want me to do, and that's what I want to do." There were days when his health wouldn't allow him to work. However, Cash would find ways to get back to recording as soon as he felt better. He even started recording with Rubin in his home when he simply didn't have enough strength to head out. Rubin told Rolling Stone, "The last session that I did was in one of the bedrooms." To get through the days and cope with his inner demons, Johnny Cash started relying on his kids. He often suffered through bouts of insomnia after June's death and found himself asking for help as the grief was overwhelming. His daughter Kathy Cash revealed in Johnny Cash the biography that to help him sleep, she would tell him stories until he finally drifted off. And his daughter Cindy Cash said, "He would not let me leave. I was only going to stay for a couple of weeks, and I ended up not leaving at all. Every day he would say, 'You're not leaving, right?' He was like a little boy again." 2 months before he died, Johnny Cash held his last live performance. On July 5, 2003, at the Carter Family Fold in Hiltons, Virginia, Cash and his band performed for a scant half hour. Though Cash was frail to the point where he needed assistance getting to the stage, he still summoned up the energy to perform some of his most beloved hits, including Ring of Fire, I Walk the Line, and Folsom Prison Blues. According to Far Out magazine, Johnny Cash paid a moving tribute to his late wife on stage. The spirit of June Carter overshadows me tonight. With the love she had for me and the love I have for her, we connect somewhere between here and heaven. She came down for a short visit tonight, I guess, from heaven, to visit with me tonight and give me courage and inspiration, like she always has. The Man in Black made history at MTV's Video Music Awards with 6 nominations in August 2003. He won an award for his take on Hurt, but couldn't make it to the ceremony. As per Entertainment Weekly, the singer was in the hospital where he had been taken to treat pancreatitis. It took him 2 full weeks to recover and get back home. When he returned, he issued a statement that read in part, "I'm excited about my video Hurt winning the MTV Cinematography Award. The making of the video was a great experience for me." Cash was edged out for the Best Pop Video Award by Justin Timberlake for Cry Me a River. In his acceptance speech, Timberlake said, "This is a travesty. I demand a recount. My grandfather raised me on Johnny Cash. I'm from Tennessee, and I think he deserves this more than any of us here tonight." Cash's manager, Lou Robin, told E! Online that Cash appreciated the sentiment. He got a big kick out of what Justin said. He was very appreciative.
The legendary Johnny Cash gave one more interview a mere month before he sadly passed away. Here's why what he said was so chilling. On August 20th, 2003, MTV News' Kurt Loder sat down with the legendary country singer-songwriter Johnny Cash for an interview following Cash's series of nominations for MTV's Video Music Awards that year. Toward the end of the wide-ranging interview, Loder asked Cash about his faith in the face of mortality. Cash admitted, "Oh, I expect my life to end pretty soon, you know? I'm 71 years old, and I have great faith, though. I have unshakable faith. I've never been angry with God. I've never turned my back on God, so to speak."
I never thought that God wasn't there. I knew that, He's my counselor. He's my wisdom. All the good things of my life come from Him.
On September 12, 2003, 23 days after what would turn out to be Cash's final interview, he died from complications from diabetes.
This half hour, Johnny Cash is gone. The country music world is saying goodbye to the legendary Man in Black. He died early this morning at a hospital in Nashville.
The week before Johnny Cash died, he finished the final track for his 5th album with Rick Rubin, American 5, 100 Highways, which was released after his death. Kurt Loder, in his final question to Cash during the MTV interview, continued with his theme of mortality.
Where do you think we go afterwards?
Where do we go? When we die, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we all hope to go to heaven.
Cash's passing came just 4 months after his wife June Carter Cash's death, and unleashed a worldwide outpouring of grief and affection for the Man in Black. U2's lead singer Bono told BBC, "I considered myself a friend. He considered me a fan. He indulged me." Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones also paid his respects, saying, "His influence spread over many generations of different people. I loved him as a singer and a writer." Fans prayed for Johnny Cash and his wife, hoping that the two were finally together as they mourned their loss. His daughter, Roseanne Cash, summed things up at his funeral with a heartfelt eulogy, saying, "I can almost live in a world without Johnny Cash because he will always be with us. I cannot begin to imagine a world without Daddy."
Over the course of his 2 marriages, Cash fathered 5 children, 4 girls with his first wife and a son with his second. All his kids have followed in their father's footsteps, if not necessarily into country music, then into the entertainment industry more broadly. Though none have achieved the same iconic level of recognition or fame as Cash himself, 2 of Cash's children are Grammy winners, including the popular recording artist and writer Roseanne Cash. Roseanne, Johnny Cash's oldest child with his first wife Vivian Liberto Cash, followed her dad into country music, had a few hits, and is active to this day. Over her 14 studio albums, she has won 4 Grammy Awards and been nominated for 16 in total, most recently winning 3 in 2014 for her Americana album, The River and the Thread. She was honored by the Country Music Hall of Fame as its 2015 Artist in Residence and also inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame the same year. Her Billboard-topping hits include I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, I Don't Know Why You Don't Want Me, and 7-Year Ache. Roseanne Cash is also the author of 4 books, including her best-selling memoir Composed, about life with and without her father, as well as her own growth as a performer. Cindy Cash, Johnny Cash's 3rd child with Vivian Liberto, took a page out of both her father and her sister's books, performing as a country musician in the group Next Generation, which also included the children of such music icons as Conway Twitty, Loretta Lynn, and George Jones and Tammy Wynette. This group, sadly, did not last very long. John Carter Cash, the only son of Johnny Cash and the only child from his marriage to June Carter, followed a similar path. He primarily works in country music as a producer, winning a Grammy for his work on his mother's album Press On in 1999, and working with other musicians such as Loretta Lynn, Willie Nelson, George Jones, and Sheryl Crow. He also recorded several albums of his own music, beginning in 2003 with Bitter Harvest. Carter Cash is also a writer, penning 3 children's books, a biography of his mother, and a memoir about his relationship with his father. Kathleen "Kathy" Cash had probably the lowest public profile of her siblings, appearing in a single movie but otherwise living a life of relative obscurity. In 2005, she publicly complained that the movie Walk the Line inaccurately portrayed her mother Vivian as a shrew. Kathy told Today, "My mom was basically a non-entity in the entire film except for the mad little psycho who hated his career. That's not true. She loved his career and was proud of him until he started taking drugs and stopped coming home." Reportedly, Kathy walked out of a family-only screening of the movie 5 times. Released in 2020, the documentary My Darling Vivian takes a closer and arguably more accurate look at Cash's first wife and their 13-year marriage. Pulling from interviews with the former couple's daughters, old letters, and photographs, the film is an homage to a woman who faded into negative obscurity after Vivian and Johnny split. Vivian and Johnny's youngest daughter, Tara, also appears to have chosen a life of relative obscurity, although she contributed photographs to a book about her father. She has also done some work in costuming as a designer and as wardrobe assistant on a couple of TV shows and movies.
Famed country singer Johnny Cash may have had 5 children, but not all of them benefited equally from his will. After such a long and prolific career, Cash left behind plenty of money. After decades of creating hit country tunes, he had reportedly amassed somewhere between $60 million and $100 million. And over time, the money continued to grow, reaching as much as $300 million. According to the Nashville Ledger, Cash finalized his estate details just before his death. And as his will would stipulate, Cash's son would inherit more money than his daughters. The family spat focuses on one song in particular, and that's Ring of Fire. June Carter Cash, Johnny Cash, and Merle Kilgore wrote the song together, and it was released in 1963, 5 years before June and Johnny got married. Decades after the couple first wrote Ring of Fire, the song caused a heated debate among the Cash children. Since June and Johnny only had one biological child together, John Carter Cash, that meant that all their other children were snubbed from obtaining royalties from the hit tune. Johnny's 4 daughters from his first marriage didn't get any royalties from Ring of Fire, but they did receive $1 million each when their father died, per Contact Music. While it's no small sum, they missed out on the steady stream of royalties generated by the beloved hit country song. According to the Daily Express, Cash's 4 daughters eventually sued their half-brother over royalties from the song. However, they lost their case in 2007. As a result, John Carter Cash remains the publishing rights owner for at least some of his dad's extensive musical legacy for the foreseeable future. Per Country Music Today, we probably won't get any more details about Johnny Cash's estate anytime soon, since the rest of his will is confidential. Subsequently, most of the details will be permanently sealed off from the public. There are conflicting stories about the origins of Ring of Fire. According to the Irish Examiner, Johnny Cash told his first wife Vivian that he gave June half credit on the tune, but only because he felt bad that the singer was low on funds. Conversely, the New York Daily News reported that Cash and Kilgore wrote the song while on a fishing trip. However, since Cash was going through a divorce at the time, he reportedly added June as a writer so that the song wasn't entirely tied to him. Regardless of the actual origins of the song, Johnny Cash, Merle Kilgore, and June Carter Cash are officially credited as writers of the song.